Welcome, everybody, to our quick collapse here at Awesomenessity, the mass learning platform that tackles mass anxiety heads on. We are very excited, Hannah and myself, to welcome our special guest today, Miss Elmeka. Welcome, Elmeka.
Hi.
It's so nice to see you, Elmeka. I know we met years ago in Malawi, where you became the counselor in primary school. And I remember all the hours and hours of conversations we had about like supporting students in general, looking a lot at child protection. But then you also moved on and became the student support coordinator in Senegal at the international school. And since then had quite a journey. So I wonder, Elmeka, how do you normally introduce yourself? What would you tell people?
I tell people I'm Elmeka Henderson. I'm an educational psychologist, and I am currently, like Eloise said, I used to be a counselor and learning support coordinator. I was the head of student support, which took care of counseling, learning support, and EAL. And I was also the child protection officer there. And then when my son graduated and moved on to uni, I decided to just freelance and do consulting. And so that's what I'm doing now.
I remember, Elmeka, the day when you told me you're also an ed psychologist. I was like, what? You're a counselor and that? You have a whole different life. It was fascinating. And I know today we're really talking to you as an expert in that area. We're really going to dive into dyscalculia, and we're excited to talk to you about it today. So thanks for being here with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, Elmeka, for everybody who's listening today, I wonder what exactly is dyscalculia and how might it show up in the classroom?
Yeah. When I explain dyscalculia to teachers, I usually say it's the math version of dyslexia. It's a specific learning disability on how the brain understands quantities, numbers, and patterns. So it's not just about a student not being good at math or not liking math. It's just how the brain kind of processes that type of information. In the classroom, it can show up in a lot of different ways. You might see a student who struggles to recognize quantities without counting, has trouble remembering math facts, or mix up things when solving problems. So they may understand the concept, but when talking about it, but then lose it when they start seeing the symbols and the multi-step instructions. I once worked with a student who could talk through a math idea awesomely, but as soon as the numbers hit the page, it was like somebody turned off a light switch. He was bright and curious and motivated, but there just wasn't a connection happening for him. And that's basically what dyscalculia can look like. Some kids can count every problem on their fingers, even simple ones. Others lose track of steps or forget math facts, but no matter how much they practice. And you think that more practice would help, but it's just how their brain processes information.
I wonder, Elmeka, you saying this, like, right, as soon as the kids see the numbers, but they could talk about it before, what if they just talk about it and use manipulatives and wouldn't write anything down? Would you be able to recognize dyscalculia or not?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that we can see it. I would say some early signs are really just showing up in everyday moments, not just like math tests. Like you said, that students who would need manipulatives and things like that, but there are some that still won't be able to understand it because they just haven't been taught to understand it that way. Some things like not being able to match the written numeral, like 6, to a group of 6 things. Others may take a long time to learn simple facts like 2 + 3, even with like repetition. As they get older, you might see some ongoing difficulty with place value, remembering procedures, or working with time and money and measurements. A big red flag for me is really like the social and emotional challenges that kids have. So you might see a student who avoids math tasks and even starts acting out or showing behavior problems long before anybody suspects that there might be a learning difference. So I think one of the biggest things that we overlook is how students talk about themselves. That when a child says, I'm just bad at math, it's easy for us to laugh it off or treat it like it's a normal part of school because us adults say that, right? But when a student avoids math, we assume that it's because nobody likes math anyway, except you guys love math so much. But sometimes those comments and behaviors are really quiet signals that the student is struggling.
Mhm. Well, I wonder, Elmeka, sometimes kids who have dyslexia, often you talk to parents and they're like, oh yeah, I also had dyslexia. So of course my child has dyslexia. Do you have similar conversations with parents about dyscalculia?
Yeah, it's less common. I think that most parents they look for the reading challenges, and I think teachers are more keen on that too. Math just seems like something that everybody kind of gets until you start noticing. But definitely having those conversations with parents, it definitely can run in a family that if there's, learning challenges, it could definitely be hereditary. But yeah, definitely talking with parents about all sorts of learning disabilities.
Are they connected in any way? Like if you have, I'm now can only think of the word dyscalculia. What's the other one?
Dyslexia?
Dyslexia, sorry. If you have dyslexia, is there any correlation to like you're more likely to have dyscalculia, or they're not connected in any way?
They're not necessarily connected. They involve some of the same parts of the brain. That is the part that looks at visual things, the part that understands, visual versus verbal information. They have some similarities, but they're not, if you have dyslexia, it doesn't mean that you're going to actually have dyscalculia. It just all depends.
Mm-hmm. So, Elmeka, I wonder in the classroom, if you have children with dyscalculia, how do teachers support kids? Like, what kind of strategies can you use without lowering the expectation or make them feel any different? But how do you support them?
I think the key to support is access and skill building, not to reduce the expectations. You can lower the expectations, but if the student still hasn't been taught the skills or been offered another way to demonstrate their learning, it's not going to make much difference. Students can still meet grade level goals when they have the right entry points. So normalizing things like number lines or reference charts or checklists, so everybody uses them, not just the students who are struggling. Teachers can build routines to really help students like preview tasks or process instructions, or even tasks on how to like check all of their steps. These things can really support the whole class without really singling anyone out. I always tell teachers that accommodations doesn't mean that you're lowering the bar. It's just changing how they learn and how they demonstrate their learning that's actually clearing the path to their success.
It's interesting because I definitely feel like there's a shift in mindset right now, like before it's like, only use the manipulatives if you really need it, or, like the number line. But as you said, like all those kind of accommodations now are there for all students. And I think changing that mindset in teachers, but then also in the classroom, that kids be like, it's actually a good thing to visualize my thinking and using the manipulatives. And it's totally okay if I use the number line and show how to do this. I think like this idea of like, we often look at universal design for learning. What is good for one is good for everybody. I think that is such an important comment to make. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the curb ramp, that visual that it's meant for one type of person, but it really helps a lot of other people as well.
And I know you already mentioned like some kind of tools that kids could use, from number lines and all the other things. But I wonder, what are some practical strategies teachers could actually use? Be like, I really don't know what I should do. Give me a few things that I can actually use in the classroom to make math more accessible for all my learners.
Oh gosh, there's so many. I would say the most helpful thing that teachers can do is make math more visual and hands-on. They don't need any like apps or things to gamify or whatever, but just, really making it visual. Many students, especially those with dyscalculia and executive functioning challenges, really need to see the math before the numbers can make sense. So teachers can use a 10 frame, so like that rectangle that has like those 10 boxes. So students can see the number 7 as 5 and 2 more rather than memorizing that 7 is 7. Place value charts that organize digits into like ones and tens and hundreds and so on can help students understand kind of what each digit represents. Bar models can help students unpack word problems. So imagine a word problem says Lena has 12 stickers and she gives 5 to her friend. How many does she have left? Instead of having the student jump straight into numbers, they'll draw a long bar to show the 12 stickers and then mark off the smaller piece of the bar that shows that the 5 gave away. This really helps them to see the parts and that the subtraction, so the subtraction makes sense. They're not just memorizing, but they're really understanding the whole, the part that was taken away and the part that remains, and they get to see kind of the structure of the math problem. Manipulatives, like we said before, I recommend to teachers that it's available for any grade level. Older students don't age out of math difficulties, and so they could benefit from manipulatives just like younger ones. Teachers can also pre-teach vocabulary, provide worked examples that show a model solution first before giving them a blank problem. Applying math to real life situations like cooking or budgeting. And then also giving them choices, like we said, UDL, you know, giving them choices on how to show their thinking, whether that's drawing or explaining out loud or using a graphic organizer. So we can really use, like, especially universal design for learning, we're all really learning about that and how to plan for the whole room. And I think that that's really what is helping allow for multiple entry points for learning. The content and the expectations stay the same, but they make the math more accessible and meaningful and less intimidating for students, not just those with math disabilities.
It's interesting, Elmeka, because I think you say those things. I was like, yep, I 100% agree. I wonder now when you talk to parents, right? I know, like, talking to a lot of our parents, they often have this mindset of like rote learning and drilling, and, you know, how do you help them shift their mindset of like those things are actually helpful? Because I wonder if you actually see that parents, they're like, okay, great, I'm jumping right in and they do everything you told me and I'm letting go of what I traditionally believe. Like, how do you get them on board?
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. And even for teachers as well, it's like, well, when I learned it was this way. I think that the way that I get through to parents is really, and just teams in general, is really having a shared picture of the child. So the teachers, the parents, the learning support staff should all be clear on what the student can do and not only where they struggle. And a lot of that is through, you know, a psychoeducational evaluation, but there's also just conversations about what we know about the student to kind of present this whole picture of them. I think that the learning support staff and the classroom teachers can really plan together to help the parent understand what are the strategies and things that work and don't work. And parents can use those to reinforce some of those approaches at home, but in low pressure ways. So they're not recreating, you know, classroom worksheets and things, but they're really taking time to play dice games or cooking together or talking through time and schedules. And that's what really can help them support their child at home.
It's so interesting because that could apply to every single student across the board. You know, and again, to go back to the curve thing, it's like you think you're helping one kid, but by doing all of that, you could be impacting so many more. But it's just kind of getting teachers being willing to do those things. Because I think a lot of sometimes there's that stereotype of, well, if I use manipulatives and it takes so much longer for me to accomplish this objective, and I've got 3,000 objectives to get to. But in reality, by taking the time to do those things, you reap the rewards later on. It's not maybe instantaneous, but long run, you do reap the rewards, but it's kind of being willing to take that time to do things like that.
Yeah. And it's definitely preventative. So you're doing all these things at the start, and you'll find that less and less students need them as time goes on.
I wonder, Elmeka, you know, often I think parents, especially, right, if they're worried about their child, they're just like, let me know what I need to do so we can close the gap. And I often hear the term like, and my kid can catch up, right? They need to catch up. And this idea of like, the child has dyscalculia, there's nothing wrong with them. It's like their brain works differently, and he has strategies with teaching them. And I'm thinking like this idea of like, as you said before, it's about like developing those skills, but also like this idea of like, what kind of strategy can I use so I can be just as successful as anybody else, right?
Yeah, and it's redefining what success is. I spoke with a group of teachers a couple weeks ago, and they were really kind of like stuck on, but they need to meet the standard. They need to meet the goal and the objective. And So I kind of used an analogy of like, well, if you were teaching PE and the lesson or the objective was that they have to run a mile, but they have a broken leg, what would you do? You would change the objective or give them something else that's different, but still teaches them the same thing that you wanted to teach. And so teachers were able to kind of make that connection because learning disabilities are invisible disabilities. And so we don't always see them. But if you kind of liken it to something they can relate to, that, oh, of course, we're not going to ask a student who doesn't have hands to write. We're going to find a different way for them to be able to, meet this objective. And so it's really looking at what is the actual objective that you're asking and how can you change something so that the student can access it a little bit better.
I wonder, Elmeka, today I was actually reading an EdPsych report of a student of ours. And one thing that was said in the report is like, if the student understands how their brain works, it's going to help them kind of evolve and develop successfully. And I thought like, oh, I love that kind of idea. And I wonder, where's you stand with Dyscalculia and actually like, once a student is diagnosed, how useful do you think is it to explain to a child, like, your brain works differently. And because of that, here's what you can do. How useful is that? And how often do you see this happen?
I see this happen a lot. In the EdPsych reports that I do, there are sections that say what the student can do for themselves. I recommend that parents at least go through the evaluation with their child. But even when I give assessments, I tell the students that, I'm an educational psychologist, which just really means that I am really interested in how the brain learns and understands. And doing all of these things helps me to understand how your brain learns. And so they become a little bit interested in like, how did this puzzle that she had me do have to do with anything else? And so really helping them understand how their brain learns really helps them to advocate for themselves, to be able to use strategies on their own. I was a really late stage ADHD diagnosis, but knowing kind of like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, then it helped me to know what works and what doesn't work. And so I'll go into a 3-hour lecture, but I'll record it because I know that I'm going to miss half of it. I think that making students aware of their strengths and their challenges, I think really helps them to become more self-aware and to be able to ask for help and support when they need it.
I think that's so important, thinking of like, involving students, giving them ownership, like, what do you need right now, right? Like we often I feel like we forget to ask students, what do you need right now? What can I do to help you? Yeah. Elmeka, I wonder if like, if somebody would ask you, like, if I want my classroom to be more inclusive, what can I do? What are some little quick tricks that you can give me so tomorrow I can take it and have accessibility in learning in my classroom?
Yeah. There's no quick tricks because it never just kind of happens quickly. But if I had to pick one thing, or maybe two, I would say make thinking visible and slow the process down. We kind of forget that kids need a little bit more processing time with things. So spend more time saying to students, let me show you a couple different ways of how to do this. Less time rewarding only the fastest answer or the student who did it exactly as shown, but really showing students that there are many valid ways to solve a problem, and really help them to be able to find like that self-advocacy, to find the path that works for them and the strategy that works for them. If we just shift that, if teachers just shift that focus from speed and correctness to strategy and understanding, that really changes the whole tone of the classroom. It really tells students that you belong here, the way that your brain thinks and learns matters, and that's really just the foundation of inclusive teaching.
And I think like it leads so nicely into this idea of collaboration too, right? Like making sure students can work together and understand, oh, all of our brains actually work differently and we all have different ways of solving a problem.
Yeah. Even when we were in school, you would say, oh, I'm a visible learner, or, I need to see step by step, or I'm hands-on. This is just a more kind of granular way of breaking it down for students, of them to understand exactly how their brain learns, but also for teachers to understand too.
Okay, it's so interesting. I always think like, there's so much like you want to do in the classroom. And I know like when Hannah and I have discussions or webinars or workshops with other educators, one thing we often hear is like, well, that all sounds nice, but you know what? I need to get through my curriculum and I don't have time and I have 24 learners. So it's like, I'm just going to do one size fits all and that's it. Like, how often do you feel like you hear that, Elmeka, and what kind of answers or support can you give teachers who feel like that?
And that's absolutely true. Like teachers, especially because of the kind of outside pressures from whether admin or their district, it's really challenging for them to be able to see how it can help. One thing I do with teachers, especially if I'm giving a workshop to teachers, I set up the workshop to mimic the strategies that they could put into their lesson. And so then afterward, they're like, well, where are the strategies? And I'm like, oh, well, when I did this was, a strategy you could use, or giving options, or all these things. And so I try to integrate those into my workshop so that teachers can see how it actually works. And then that's when the aha moment happens.
And even the strategies you mentioned before, like even like checklist or visualizing things, it's not just for math, right? You can put this in any kind of classroom and learning environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Like visual schedules and making things visible just helps with that kind of predictability. And especially with kids, when there's predictability and they know what to expect, then it kind of calms them down and they're a little bit better ready to learn.
And I think you can nicely refer back to things like, oh, I don't remember how to do this. Oh, let's find the visual that you made and let's talk about it. Like really nice to be able to refer back to other students' work or their own work to kind of reframe it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Elmeka, this has been really interesting, and I feel like in a very short time you were able to give some amazing tips. And I know you say there are no quick fix, but hopefully, like people can listen to it and feel inspired to try one thing out. I think it's always like do one thing, like even if you just change one thing in your classroom, right? That's already opening the doors more and more for inclusivity in your classroom.
Exactly. Just one small step, it can make the world of difference.
Oh, well, Elmeka, thank you so much. I know
Thank you.
Talking to you before, but again, you did it again. So thank you so much for inspiring us and our followers. And it was lovely to have you on our podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.